Our second scripture lesson is from Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 to 10. Listen now for the word of the Lord. Now a man from the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw that he was a fine baby, she hid him 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and plastered it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds on the bank of the river. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river while her attendants walked beside the river. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her maid to bring it. When she opened it, she saw the child. He was crying, and she took pity on him. "This must be one of the Hebrews' children," she said. Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a nurse from the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you?" Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and she took him as her son. She named him Moses because, she said, "I drew him out of the water." This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You don't have to know much about swimming to know that there are 4 basic strokes in swimming competition. Today's also the city-county swim meet, so there's several of our members are doing that right now, putting these strokes to use. There's the backstroke, the breaststroke, the butterfly, and the freestyle. Most every swimmer masters each of these strokes and competes in different events of different lengths with all of the different strokes. But for most swimmers, they have some events and some strokes that they excel at more than others. The reason for that is that each stroke of swimming utilizes different muscle groups and skills. To be a strong backstroke swimmer, you have to have strong pectoral muscles as well as glutes and thighs to get that kick going when you're going backwards. To be a strong breaststroke swimmer, you have to have really strong lower body because a lot of your motion is propelled by the kick that you make under the water. The butterfly champion has to have very strong shoulders and arms to propel them through the water, and the champion freestyle swimmer benefits from large hands and feet and very strong hips. So when you're putting together a 4x100 medley team where one swimmer swims a different stroke for each segment of the race, you want to pick the person who's strongest in that particular event. Every swimmer gets into the water, but they have to do their stroke in a particular way in order to bring home the gold medal. Today's scripture in Exodus is a version of a 4x100 medley relay. There are 4 women featured, and each one must perform their role perfectly in order to achieve their goal of rescuing the young child from the basket in the Nile River. That action will ultimately be the cause of the downfall of Pharaoh's economic order and the liberation of Israel from slavery. For those who may not know the Exodus story, the events that happened before our moment today, Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, has enslaved the Hebrew people for years. It made them build the pyramids and other infrastructure projects in the nation. And while Pharaoh controls the lives of these mass workers for the purpose of his imperial goals, he knows that if they grow too numerous, they could eventually rebel against him and overthrow him in his power. So he puts out an edict that declares that any Hebrew male 2 years old or younger should be put to death. He actually says that those 2-year-old males should be thrown into the Nile River. It's under this genocidal threat, then, that Jochebed and Amram have a son. They hide him away for 3 months. But when the child is 3 months old, Mother Jochebed steps up onto the starting block to begin the relay, a relay that will reshape the course of human history. But it will take each swimmer swimming their leg perfectly. Jochebed is the backstroke swimmer who takes off from the start. She swims backwards. That seems like a nonsensical thing to do, but Jochebed is a rather subversive person. She follows the decree of the Pharaoh to put all Hebrew boys in the Nile River. But she does that with her son in a carefully crafted basket that she hides among the reeds in the water. And her daughter, also her partner on the swim team, Miriam, she hides in the shadows to watch. Now, there's a great deal of risk in this relay. But the way the story goes, it sounds like Jochebed and Miriam have a plan. This isn't necessarily the last-ditch effort of a desperate woman. Do they know through their con that they're planning that the princess of Egypt comes to bathe at this spot in the river? Do they know something about her personality and sympathies, or are they just hoping to God for an act of compassion? We don't know, but the way the story's told, it sounds like there is some kind of strategy at play here. At this point, the backstroke leg ends, and the next swimmer, the breaststroke swimmer, takes off from the platform. The Pharaoh's daughter comes with her servants. She will swim a leg, but it's not her turn yet. She notices the basket, and she sends one of her maids to retrieve it. This is where that breaststroke leg begins. The maid with the princess. To whom will this maidservant be loyal? As Rabbi Jonathan Sachs comments on this moment in the story, her maids are with her, her slave girl is standing beside her. She must face the risk that one of them, in a fit of pique or even mere gossip, will tell someone about it. Rumors flourish in royal courts. But the maid obeys. The Pharaoh's daughter stands firm. She hears the cry from the basket, and she says, "It must be one of the Hebrews' children." That is a remarkably important line for the princess to say, because it informs us that she's no beauty queen who has no idea of her father's political agenda. She knows what the edict is. She's not yet swimming her leg of the race, but she's definitely warming up, stretching her limbs for the final leg. It's Miriam, though, who comes in at this moment. She's the breaststroke swimmer, the most challenging leg, the most physical, exhausting leg of this 4-part race. She steps out of the reeds. The plot is working. But this is the greatest moment of tension in the scene. The slave girl, the Hebrew slave girl, confronting the daughter of the Pharaoh. "I could get you a nursemaid for the child if you want one," Miriam says to the princess. That's the text. But what's the subtext? Miriam is communicating with the princess. The princess is smart. We've already seen that. She knows that this girl was already there behind the reeds with the basket. She knows who the nurse of this boy is going to be if she says yes. But it is a way to save the life of the child without openly defying the edict. And so with that yes, Miriam, exhausted, hits the wall, and Pharaoh's daughter leaps from the platform to finish the final freestyle leg. For she allows Jochebed to nurse the boy. and she remembers her promise. This is not just a momentary pulling of the heartstrings. At the time that the boy is weaned, he's brought to the princess, and she takes him in. This is not just temporary compassion. She brings him into the palace. She raises him as her son, and it is an Egyptian princess, the daughter of the oppressor Pharaoh, who is given the line in the story of Exodus that names this child. The most important name in all of the Hebrew Bible is given to this boy by an Egyptian princess, adopted mother. She names him Moses. So, are you ready to don your swim cap and goggles and jump in the water with this relay team? They have much to teach us. First, they are not viewed as a threat to the political leader. The Pharaoh orders the killing of all Hebrew boys 2 and under because in his misogynist, violent, militarized mind, he can only imagine that men would ever be a threat to his power, men who use weapons and fists to fight for their freedom. But who he should be afraid of is these women, the overlooked, the ones on the outside, the cunning con artists who so delicately play their role to thwart the oppression and the injustice that claims their people. So if you want to join this swim team, it's driven by compassion, care, and commitment to a God who works in the shadows. That's important for us to remember on days like this. As Christian people, when we have heard of an attempt to kill a former president at a campaign rally, regardless of your political convictions, this must be declared to be evil. It is unfaithful. This is not how God would ever work. Second, on this swim team, you look for talented teammates wherever you can find them. The Pharaoh's daughter shows us that she, an insider, a part of the establishment of Egypt, is in control of the land. Even within that tyrannical regime, that corrupt government, there are people who answer to something greater than the leader at the top. The princess shows us her loyalty to that something greater when she lifts the Hebrew child from the basket in the river. She is an agent of God's compassion, even without being a member of the Hebrew people. Compassion is more important than control. Well, it's a warning to be careful about who you do or who you don't invite to be part of your relay team, where you might just find the most important swimmer in the race. Third, this relay team will change the course of human history. But that history does not change immediately when they hit the wall and the horn sounds to mark that they've completed each leg of the competition. Moses will be 80 years old when God calls him to fulfill what he was rescued from the water to do: guide all of the Hebrew people through the water of the Red Sea from slavery and into freedom. The act of quiet compassion that defied the Pharaoh leads to transformation. But it takes 8 decades before we can look back on this relay team and understand the consequence of their conviction. This swim team gives us a training plan then for any time when we live in political uncertainty, in a time of power, control, fear. One, They show us that violent revolt is never our response. Tyrants love violent revolt because they understand violent revolt. It's how they usually get and maintain their own power. They can identify who's a threat to possibly wield such violence against them, and then they'll take the necessary measures to crush that effort. But the unseen ones, moved by compassion for the child in the basket, that's God's way of undermining oppression. What they also display is that our lives carry great consequences, but we often are not around to see the consequences of our actions or our inactions. Within this story, only Miriam ever shows up again, this time with her tambourine in her hand, singing and dancing down the dry Red Sea bed as the people leave slavery to freedom. Jochebed never knows what happens to her boy. The princess of Egypt fades from the scene after this story. They did what was right in the eyes of God because it was right in God's eyes. And then they trusted that God would do something with their act of faithfulness. So let me encourage us on this day when perhaps we feel a bit uneasy, worried about the stability of our nation and our people. If you're trying to figure out how do we respond, how do we live, how do I stay a person of hope? Well, we put on our swim cap and our goggles, or to borrow the more traditional language of the church, we wear our baptism. You see, we've already been in these waters before. We're already part of the swim team. So for all of you on the team, if you're worried today about the stability or the future of our republic or our democracy, if you've been following elections in the UK and Europe and you wonder about the global world order, if you're seeing reports out of Ukraine and Gaza and Haiti and Sudan and these things depress and demoralize you, remember, violent revolt is never the Christian way. It is abiblical. Look for allies, Christian or otherwise, who are committed to the way of compassion above all else, and then swim your leg well. Quiet acts of compassion performed in faith, trusting that God, who has again and again taken such acts, will once again continue to work miracles, free the oppressed, and provide abundance where all looks like wilderness. So swimmers, take your mark.